So here we're told that Solomon's rent has been increased by 40%, and he needs to maintain the same net income. Question is, by what percent can he raise, or does he need to raise the revenue? So I'll start with statement one. It says 20%. So if this was, say, all revenue, I'm going to call that R. 20% of that was going to rent, which means 0.2 R. This is the amount going to the rent category. The remaining is 0.8 R. So we know that this rent, so this is our previous situation with the increased rent, his rent would be 40% higher than that, which means we have a multiplier of 1.4, because 40% plus the original 1. And so that would be 0.28 R. So that's his revenue. So this, if this was new revenue, this would be the rent portion. We want the remaining piece to be the same so that his net income remains the same. Now, if we add those two, that would tell me what this new total revenue needs to be. And if you add those two quantities, it's 1.08 R. So if we compare the original revenue to this new scenario so that he can have the same net income, you'll see it's a multiplier of 1.08. And that means he needs to increase his revenue by 8%. So even though we don't know the values for revenue or rent, we can still answer the question that he needs to increase the revenue by 8%. So 1 alone is sufficient. And statement 2 just says that new rent is $50 more than the previous. So with that alone, I guess we can just figure out the rent part, which is that the rent increased by 40%. So if the original is R, the increase is 40% of that, and that's this increase, $50. So we can figure out our rent. That's pretty much all you can do. And you don't have to do these calculations, but just to put some numbers here. And the new would be 300. But in this case, we have no information about the total revenue. We don't know the previous revenue, nor do we know the current. So for example, if his revenue was $1,000 and then $250 was going to rent, and in new situation his rent is $300, but we have no information about this revenue. So if, for example, here he needs to keep it $750, then we have a $1,050. In this case, it's a 5% increase. But if I change that to, let's say, 1,500, you'll see you'll get different numbers. So this will be 1,250, and then we have 300 here, 1,250. Total is 1,550. And now this is a 50 over 1,500. So this is going to be about 3%, 3 something. So we'll have different values depending on the base you choose. So I just gave these examples. I mean, sometimes it's not necessary to do all this work. But I think when you're doing this for the first time, I think it's helpful to do this additional work when you're learning data sufficiency. But over time, you'll start to see that it's insufficient. So here the answer is A.